Chapter 3 is really another look at the historical perspectives. And instead of trying to report history, they're trying to commentate and think about it in Chapter 3. It got a little bit long, but I think it's more interesting than the last chapter, and you'll find it. I'm sorry I get off again. I get carried away. I get kind of whiny and complainy, and I think it has to do with something with my age or something. But if you'll just stick with me, Chapter 3 is more enjoyable. Chapter 3, Historical Perspectives of Education. Perspectives of the same authors that in the Chapter 2 they took you through the history. Chapter 3, the perspectives of it. And they give you some prelims for that. Okay. More students, bigger schools, and that's the prelim for it. And growth, phenomenal change. Here, let's take out here rapid growth in size and complexity of schools, and that's not profound to you. Demand expectation placed on schools by the information age. We have that last chapter. Trying to provide equal educationals for all students has been a challenge and practical value of history of education, and they try and walk all the way around this practical application. So more students, rapid growth, more school of need for schools, need for teachers, school district consolidation, busing, bigger school budgets, curricular, growth education programs. And so I have those here, and this will be your number 1 here, each of these. Number 1, you're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. And you're going to have a one-line tag for each of those from the textbook. And you bring that over here, and again, make those red for me so I can find them. First of all, the enrollment growth. I've highlighted some stuff here. Let me get this up where you can see better. As the sheer size, the total number of public school students in the United States has about doubled during this time in the last half century. So bring that in about enrollment growth. This nearly doubled. Although part of it's attributed to overall population growth, more of it was the fact that more people go to school. The compensatory attendance laws, just as we found last chapter in South Dakota, the compensatory attendance changed in South Dakota in 2009 from 16 to the age 18. That added more people to the school rolls. Not a significant amount, but enough that they had to plan for those additional students in the school, and that's across the country. And you think in the last half century, those compensatory laws really kept increasing. For the more they stayed in school, you know that my dad's time, an 8th grade education was considered a good, solid education. And now, of course, that would be considered a very poor education. And with that, need for more schools, and again, we're jumping right here. Need for more schools. Many schools had to resort to temporary mobile classrooms. Okay, and it gives you a whole plethora of stuff here that they did to placate not having enough room in the schools as the schools grew. Other strategies to cope with the classroom shortage, including larger classes, split scheduling, very early in the day and late in the day, classes held in makeshift areas, the gym, hallway, storage closets. Many schools also rented additional space in nearby buildings. Fortunately, over time, taxpayers were generally willing to take care of this. I observed a student teacher one time that taught her class in the library while the library was functioning because there wasn't enough class space. You've seen lots of mobile classrooms around in South Dakota. My wife's cousins in Chicago, they're older than I am now, but when they were in school, they moved to a new suburb of Chicago. And at that time, there was such rapid growth there, they did the split schedule. They did the split schedule where you either had the morning school or afternoon, 7 to noon, or from like noon till 5 or 6. And that's how they did it. And they built all kinds of elementary schools. And then, as you can imagine, that suburb landlocked, couldn't grow anymore, and the kids went through the school system. And then by the time I knew this family 30 years ago, met them 30 years ago, they were in the process of trying to figure out what to do with all these school buildings. They'd built so many schools to take care of the needs of the students then that as you can imagine, those kids all moved through school. The family stayed in the suburb because it was such a nice suburb, and suddenly they had elementary buildings sitting empty. And at that time, I've lost track of it now, but in about 1990, they had sold 2 of the 3 elementary buildings, closed the middle school, moved the middle school kids to the high school, and still had half the high school building unused, just because they got landlocked. And I wonder sometimes in our communities around here if that's happening, that we're building so fast that the day comes where we don't need that much school building. And that would be a real challenge as a planner of some of our rapidly growing school districts is, will this ever end? Will we landlocked where we have buildings we don't need? But that's going to be our first discussion for this. First discussion is about that for you, and everybody respond to this. I'm going to just call it makeshift classrooms. Okay, I just said, did you ever attend a makeshift classroom due to space issues? Explain. And again, once you have responded, please mark that. Please mark that in here so we have it. I'm just going to put a widget down here for you, discussion area, so that we have that. There it is, makeshift classroom. Okay, that's one. There'll be others, and then I say mark that, please, on your notes that you've done that. And I'm going to say this is just put a little discussion here. All right. Now, the need for more teachers. Naturally, this surge in student enrollment required many additional teachers. To alleviate this, and this is what the problem, bring this in your notes, that states lowered their certification requirements because there wasn't enough teachers. So they lowered their certification requirements to sometimes the point there was no requirement because they couldn't get teachers. And now, as cruel and horrible as that sounds, but here's your choices. Your choices are lower your requirements or not have anybody, not have teachers. And so that's what drove that, and that at the time was a good decision. This also more of everything was required to provide education to the budgeting school population. So if you needed more schools, more teachers, you also needed more buses, more cooks, more books, more desks, more space, more playground, more parking. And what's interesting about this discussion, you look at around rural South Dakota of the number of schools that have the opposite problem, that they're shrinking so fast. And why are they shrinking? Why are our rural schools shrinking? I'm going to ask you to do that here also under more teachers. Why are our rural schools shrinking? So this will be number 2, this will be number 3. You're still going down this list here. Why are the rural schools shrinking in South Dakota? Why are they closing? Where are the kids going? School district consolidation of school districts is another noble administrative trend. During the past 75 years, the number of separate school districts have reduced, and this is what I want you to bring in here, this reduction from 117,000 districts in 1940 to 14,000 today. And I'm not even going to guess the percentage drop that is, but from 117,000 to 40. And there's a corresponding decline in the number of one-teacher schools over this time. And really, that's what drives that. I did a little search here on one-room schools. I'm just going to do this like a one-room school. And this is the way our country started, was one-room schools. And for the most part, as we studied the history of this, and here's some nice looks at one-room schools, and some of our TV programs, Little House on the Prairie and the Waltons, and some of those old syndicated movies gave you somewhat of a glimpse of this. And that is that they were across ages in that community. Now here's some stuff that's not in the text, but let me give you the basics of this. Each township, and I know this is South Dakota law in most of the rural areas, each township, and a township is 8 miles by 8 miles, each township was required to have a school. That school was considered a school district. Let me just I'll put that on there and see if I can find something with that. But each township, like here's a township school. So they were small. This represents a reunion of those townships. My wife's country school, she attended country school till she completed the 3rd grade before they went to what was called then town school. And at that time, they closed that rural school. And that dissolved that school district. So that's a large part of this shrinkage from 117,000 to 14,000. Now I could do a whole thing, get carried away about the equity of the size of our schools. That my sons will go to a high school with 24 or 2,500 kids, and many of us went to a high school with less than 100. Less than 100. And with that, where's the equity in that? And you don't hear about that. The equity is these small schools and closing them, but is there any equity? Is there any reason that my kid has to go to a school of 2,500? Now, I know. I had somebody right in our hallway, right down the hall from me, 2 doors, say, well, why don't you move to a smaller school if you don't like it? Can't do that. That would be separate but equal. Can't be separate. That's what we said to the black kids. That's what we said to the poor kids. Move. Go someplace else. We don't have to offer you an equal opportunity. We don't have to offer you as good an opportunity. What I'm questioning is it as valuable? Is the education as valuable in a building with 2,500 as is 100? Is that equal? Is that fair? I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but I know it's dramatically different attending a school with 2,500 kids or 100. A high school. Good and bad about both, and that's another discussion another day. But consolidation of these small township schools is the most what drove this. Then the growth of busing is estimated that about 60% of all students are bused to school. About 450 school buses, 450,000 school buses, and I'm going to ask that as another one. Here, and that is to tell about your experiences being bused. All right, and say riding the bus. Or not riding. Okay, I said related experience about riding the bus to school or not riding. That's your second thing here. All right. And I'm going to take you back here and say that's number 4. Okay. And the thing that, again, is interesting here is that they don't talk about the real busing, and that's this again. I want to talk briefly about called forced busing. And this was part of the desegregation process in the 70s. And I don't know, again, it doesn't fit these authors' narrative to tell this story, but in the 70s, they said to students, get on the bus and go to another school. And what they were doing is trying to just segregate some schools, because what would happen, as in today, that the small, the downtown areas often had the poorer kids and often the minority kids, and the more affluent kids, the more affluent families would move to the suburbs to attend better schools. And some of the bright people of the time said, gee, this isn't fair. We've got to have kids integrated. So they would come into these white schools, into these more affluent schools, and force some of the kids to get on the bus and ride as much as an hour downtown. And then they'd pick up those kids from the downtown area and make them ride that hour back and be in the suburban schools. And that went on about 10 years, and you can see the riots. And that was the thing, is families moved. I mean, they moved completely out of state to get away from this, but it was just so interesting that powers to be said, gee, we've got to integrate kids. And no, the kids didn't want this. Neither side wanted this. It was driven by a small group of people that got power, and still, in my opinion, still in power in the schools. But it's so interesting that these authors, in their narrative here, don't even describe that time, because I'm sure they would have been once endorsing that. But it's being dropped from the history books, but thank goodness for Google. Some images, but that's what it was. It was a horrible time where they forced kids to attend schools that weren't in their neighborhood in the name of desegregation. You know, and don't call me a racist, but I don't think Martin Luther King would have been for this. Martin Luther King wasn't for desegregation. Martin Luther King was equal opportunity for everybody. He knew birds of a feather wanted to flock together. But this would have broke his heart. You got to remember, he was killed in the 60s, was assassinated in the 60s. This was the 70s in the name of desegregation, and people lost their lives, and there was just strife in our country because a few smart people decided that kids needed to go to school someplace other than their neighborhood schools. So let's move on to bigger school budgets. And again, it tries to give you a scenario here of the growth. It says $5 billion, $2 billion in this country in 40, 5 and 50, 15 billion in 60, 40 billion in 70, 97 billion in 80, and 208 billion in 90. And I'm sure it's doubled now. It's 23 years later. I'm sure it's more than doubled again. Even the figures are for inflation. The percentage by gross domestic is 3.5% of our gross domestic product was spent in 40, and now it's 7 and 80. And so, of course, with that huge budget growth, and you can bring some of that into your part here about bigger budgets. And then the rapid growth and curricular changes. I just jumped down here in 58, shortly after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. Congress passed the National Defense Act. And what I'm going to ask you to do is put a little bit here about Sputnik. Sputnik was significant in schools, and so I want you to do a little link here, a little research on Sputnik, and not so much what it was, but what was its effect on schools, on the public schools. So you may want to Google it by putting Sputnik, public schools, and see what it says. But Sputnik had a dramatic thing. One, we immediately passed this Congress National Defense Education Act law, and so put that in here also. But this will be number 5. Here is what is Sputnik, and put a little link to where you found the information. Bring a couple sentences. Remember, I showed you how to link something. Do you want me to show you again? Here's a quick lesson on it. So here you're in Sputnik, and you're finding something, and you've got your information in here, so you block it. We call that blocking it. And then come here under Insert, and yours may be a little different, but nonetheless will be somewhat the same. You go to Insert here, and here's the thing called Hyperlink. Come up like this, and you drop your URL. You paste your URL from wherever you found that in here. And I can grab one here like this. So if I want this here, I copy this URL, and I come back to this paper here, and I drop that in there. I drop this in here like this, and now that's hyperlinked. But Sputnik had a profound effect, got everybody nervous, excited, made the feds get involved, took some action here. And it brought this NDEA, and there's a question on the test about NDEA, so please be familiar with what that is, what it stands for. It's significant. What is the significance of it to our conversation here? And then the growth of special education programs, number one was 94-142, and that's what you want to bring in your notes, is the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. And if you've had an Intro to SPED course, the SPED 100 course, certainly you know what that is, but it was the first real federal, sweeping federal piece of legislation that had this to say, all kids were entitled to free and appropriate public education, a FAPE, free, appropriate public education regardless of disability, because at the time we still had a sector of students that were severely disabled that we'd said couldn't be in our schools, and rather than try and define who could be and who couldn't be, 94-142, and they've had to update it a bunch of times, put more teeth in it because schools wouldn't comply, but to the point now where this is the law of the land, that all students are entitled to a free, appropriate public education, a FAPE, and you can put that acronym in your notes if you want, FAPE, but 94-142. This will be a little sidebar that I like to put in here, but you tell me in your notes here, what does that, all the stuff I gave you, and we're going to make this number 6, but what does 94 and 142 stand for? The number 94 and 142. A little history lesson, a little government lesson there for you. All right. And let's move on. More changes, challenges, and perspectives. First of all, and this is really interesting, and this is the one I want to push on a little bit. You can disagree, and that's great, but the increasing involvement of the federal government, and if I'll allow me to read, I want to spew this a little bit, as shown in the Education and News feature at the beginning of this chapter. Our federal government has played an increasingly important role in education over the years, and why I'm copying an attitude about that is there's absolutely no provision whatsoever in the Constitution about education, that the education was to be exclusively to the states, hence the term United States. But Sputnik was the first real kickoff of it, and from then on to this day, the federal government is almost taken exclusive control of our schools. And the most recent one that's not mentioned in this discussion is Common Core Standards. That is a takeover by the feds, by the federal government. So if you allow me to read, I'm right here. Policymakers at federal level have provided funds for specific education programs and have passed many laws and regulations pertaining to schools. Presidents have created programs and regulations affecting schools. The federal courts have handed down decisions and have had great ramifications for our schools, and a variety of federal agencies have created programs and regulations from our schools. So from the top down, we have given away the control of our schools. And what do we get out of it? We get money, and we're like prostitutes. If someone will give us money, we will gladly give control of our schools, control away. So in the 1940s, the nation saw the nation at war, which provided an impetus for the federal government to pass numbers of laws that affected education. One was, and it was huge, the Vocational Education for National Defense Act. It was a crash program to prepare workers needed in industry and produce goods for the national defense. So that's what I highlighted there. You'll want to bring that into your notes here under increasing federal involvement. And we're up to number 7 here. And with that, you're going to say something about each of these: National Science Foundation and categorical aid in the GI Bill. Okay. If you allow me to keep reading here, the program operated through state educational agencies and trained more than 7 million workers. In 1941, the Laham Act provided funds for building, maintaining and operating community facilities in areas where local communities had unusual burdens because of defense and war initiatives. And this was the foothold. It was wartime. And so they gave money specifically to do things that were needed. Okay, just remember that. That's the genesis. That's the beginning to where it grew today. First, the GI Bill. The federal government recognized the need to help young people whose careers had been interrupted by military services. And I want you to put that in your notes. This is what the GI Bill was for. To help people whose careers had been interrupted. The GI Bill of 1944 provided for the education of veterans in World War II. Later, similar bills assisted veterans of the Korean conflict. These federal acts afforded education more than 10 million veterans at a cost of $20 billion. Payments were made directly to veterans and to the colleges and schools and veterans attended. In 1966, another GI Bill was passed for veterans of Vietnam. The initial cost of these amounted to a wonderful national investment because the government was repaid many times over by increased tax revenue, eventually paid by veterans. Okay, so they're justifying their involvement that it generated money, and you could make that case. And it is alive and well today. I have a nephew that was just out of the military for the first time in our history. The drawdown of our troops is not voluntary. He had 10 years in and did not want to leave, and they said, we're letting people go. And so he's out, but he has GI Bill money to go spend now to go to school. Okay, National Science Foundation is another one now for your notes. Established in 1950, the need for continued support for basic scientific research was created to promote a progress of science. Advance national health, prosperity, welfare, secure the national defense. Again, there's a question about that, the National Science Foundation. And this is the big one. This is the one I think is where we have now given it all away in the name of federal aid in dollars. Categorical federal aid. Beginning in 1957, when the first Soviet space vehicle launched, the federal government further increased participation in education. So the big first step in their increase, and of course with that, it was shortly after that we got prayer out of our schools and stuff because the feds got involved. The NDEA, Vocational Education Act of 63, Manpower Development Training Act of 62, Element Ed Act of 65, International Education Act of 66, all of these were federal acts to take control of schools. And then it came down here, and here's what you'll want to also put in your notes. Project Head Start, National Teacher Corps, Upward Bound are further indications of such participation. All these acts and programs have involved categorical federal aid to education, meaning if you would do what they say, you can have the money. And of course, you know how we are as schools and educators. We'll say, oh yes, if you'll give us money, we'll do whatever you say, Master. We'll do whatever you say. And we did. And to the point we're addicts now that we can't live without that pipeline of categorical federal aid. Okay, some people believe that federal influence in education has recently been greater than either state or local influence. And again, I resent this thing of some people. No, anybody that's paying attention knows that we no longer have control at the local level. We've given control through Common Core, No Child Left Behind, 94-142, all those pieces of legislation mentioned up here to the federal government. And again, I say to you, there is no mention in the Constitution as the responsibilities of our federal government to do anything with education. That's left exclusively to the states. And it's not left or right. It's all, many presidents on both sides have signed pieces of legislation taking control of schools, of our schools, when they really have no constitutional authority to do so. There can be no denying that through federal legislation, U.S. Supreme Court decisions, federal administrative influence, and total federal effect on education is indeed great. And they're not poo-pooing this. They're agreeing this. They're for this, but these authors support this, but they're not denying that it's happened. Indication are that this effect will even be more pronounced in the future. And again, I'm glad that these very opinionated people at least will acknowledge that we're going to give more control to the feds. And why? Money. If they give us money, we'll do whatever they say. We'll take prayer out. We'll take soda out. We'll change our lunch programs. We'll change the day. We'll change the curriculum. Whatever the feds tell us, as long as the money keeps coming. We mean for historians to determine whether this trend in U.S. education is a beneficial one. And thank you for them to acknowledge that. That will remain for historians to determine whether this trend in U.S. education is a beneficial one. And that is giving control to the feds. I didn't mean to get that cranked up about it, but I did. The struggle for equal educational opportunity has characterized struggle for equal educational opportunity for all. Here, the African American activism. The struggle was initiated by African American activism movement and given momentum by women's rights groups, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and other chapters deal with it. And so this was all done by community organizers, and that was their job to promote this equal opportunity. And what's interesting, again, they don't mention here that a lot of these schools that are mentioned that the community organizers went after get more federal and state dollars per student than the more affluent area ones. And so it's so interesting to say that we haven't provided the opportunities. We have at least provided the dollars. If dollars was the answer, this would have been solved years ago. And if you want to see that dollars aren't, it mentions Native Americans here for the first time, go look at our reservation schools who get more dollars per student than anybody else in the state and see what their achievements and stuff are, their achievement scores and their graduation rates. So it's my contention, and contrary to what the authors of the book say, that money does not fix this. Money does not fix this. Oh, what fixes it? That's a whole nother class. Then No Child Left Behind, and again I'm bringing it over here. Equal opportunities. This is number 8 and number 9, and you're going to make some notes about both of these. Federal government's recent major efforts to improve education to help children. And this is so interesting because as we look at here, they're very accepting and complimentary of these other steps in the federal government's involved. But look at this one. The No Child Left Behind, it says the most recent major effort to improve education and help children, especially disadvantaged children, sweeping legislation commonly referred to No Child Left Behind, NLBC, which the goal of the law is admirable but has been widely criticized. And then they go on to list the criticisms. I don't understand that they list all the pro parts of all these up here. They're fine, but this piece here, they say it had admirable goals. The law has it was admirable goals, but here's the reasons it's been criticized. Well, tell us what was. Please don't show your colors here. Tell us what the admirable goals. What were the goals? What was the positives? What's been the good? And what I want you to do is bring this out here is what it was. And then recent changes to this law allow states to opt out. So this is what the current administration said when they ran, that they would, first thing they would do is overturn this from the last administration. But in essence, what they did, like so many laws, they just told which states they didn't have to comply. South Dakota is still bound to this law and its requirements, but 29 states, right here, 29 states have chosen not to do so. No, the feds had to allow them to not do so. But so interesting, their take on this, that they're not giving you the strength of this. That bothers me that these folks would author a book and be that biased, that one-sided on things. But that's their theme throughout the book. It fits their narrative, so it's all good except this piece here. And they don't, I don't know. They lose their credibility by doing it that way. Okay, that's number 9. We're going on to changes, challenges, perspective, professionalization of teaching. And this has been pretty widely discussed with you. Formal teacher training is a relatively recent phenomenon. Teacher training programs were developed during the late 19th century and the first half of the 20th. Continue to refine it. And here's what I want you to talk about this, like the things that were refined. all facets of education. Here, this will be your, we're up to number 10, are these things that were refined: curriculum, teaching methodology, training of school service personnel, administrators, counselors, librarians, media and specialists, in-service teacher training, teacher organizations, and even school building construction. Those are the way it's been professionalized in that. Okay. Put in number 10. Moving on, continuance importance of private schools. If you allow me to read, nearly all early schools in colonial America were private, and religion was the main purpose of education. Boy, have we abandoned that. Children were taught to read primarily so that they could study the Bible, or in essence read the Bible, and most early colleges were private, established primarily to train ministers. Okay, so we talked about that last chapter. That was the parameter of education. The old deluder law, the old Satan deluder law is so that you could enter God's heaven by being learned in the Bible. And as the public school systems developed, however, the religious nature of education gradually diminished to the point of relatively few U.S. children attend religious schools. And that's not too, relatively few is not a fair statement. There has always been certain religious groups, however, who have labored to create and maintain their own private schools so that religious instruction could permeate all areas of curriculum. The most notable of these religious groups have been the Roman Catholic Church. During the past 25 years, though, enrollment in non-Catholic religious schools has grown dramatically, whereas Catholic school enrollment has declined. In other words, the other denominations, and a lot of, as I told you, my kids went to an elementary school that was was Christian education, and it was known as a non-denominational. And I know we had several Catholic kids that attended there, were classmates with my boys. So there have the others, other than the Catholics, caught on. The Catholic school, there's no doubt, in my dad's time, he went to school in the 50s, just about every community had a Catholic school. And some of you from small communities, ask your parents, will tell you, oh yeah, there used to be a Catholic school. And they're all gone away. Despite the recent trend, the Roman Catholic Diocese operate extremely large school systems, sometimes larger than the public school system in some areas. One example is Chicago Archdiocese, which operates the largest Roman Catholic school in the United States. And so maybe that's one thing you bring in your notes here. The one in Chicago has the largest Roman Catholic school. That would be here, number 11. And this will be number 12. I'll get to that in a second. With rare exceptions, private and parochial schools struggle to raise the funds they need to exist. Typically must charge tuition fee, yes, a large one, rely on private contributions, and conduct various fundraising activities. And also my kids went to private school. We never stopped selling candy bars and cookie dough and things and raising money, only to find my kids in public school now, it's no different. We never get done selling stuff either. In recent years, some school districts have made tuition vouchers available to parents who choose not to send their children to public schools to take their money with them. And again, that is a whole other thing that they skip over here, and that is the voucher system. Tuition fee. In recent years, some school districts have made tuition vouchers available to parents who choose not to send their children to private schools. And the federal government was interesting. In Washington, D.C. was one that had a voucher program, and that is anybody that wanted to send their kids to private school could take their state money, their state support with them to support that private school. And the current administration was elected. That was the first thing they stopped, was that voucher system. And even though the president's kids go to a private school in Washington, D.C., he stopped the voucher system so the other poor kids couldn't. So I thought that was interesting. Then there's homeschooling, and there is in this day and age, even 10 years ago this was unheard of. 20, nobody knew what this was, but today none of you, every one of you have heard of this, and it's just educating kids in the home. Children at home were those who lived far from school. It was impossible for children to attend. In the past several decades, however, a growing number of parents have been choosing to educate their children at home, at least through elementary grades, and sometimes even through high school. I have 2 nieces. My brother and his wife are homeschooling their 2 daughters, and they're basically the same age as my boys. They say when they get to high school age, they're going to send them to school, but at this point, they're still being homeschooled. Often it stems from a concern that children in the public schools may be exposed to problems such as drugs, alcohol, smoking, or gangs. Okay, and that could be, it goes on here, other parents have religious motives, and I think that's more common, want their children to be taught a particular religious content. Still, other parents may have had experiences with public schools, have had bad experiences, simply feel they can provide a better education for their children at home. Recent laws and court cases have generally helped upheld that right, within a certain parameters of parents that educate their children to do so. The number of parents providing homeschooling has grown each year in the last decades. Recent development among a minority of those who homeschool is a philosophy sometimes called unschooling, and this I haven't heard of, in which parents provide no instruction but allow their children to learn through whatever they naturally do. And as one would expect, there's many different perspectives on the value of homeschooling in our society. Now, I think and I've known not lots, but I would say more than 10 families that have homeschooled. And here's my take on it. Disagree, push back, spew if you want. But those kids were matured a lot quicker. My kids learned to talk about drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and not to adults. And most of the homeschool kids I've met, and now I've observed many of them in adult life, function much better because become very comfortable talking with adult subjects, things that are going on in life, and don't learn to talk about drugs, sex, and rock and roll, so they have a hard time. We get all cranked up about socialization. They're not socializing stuff, and which simply means they don't understand which drug there is and where to get them and how much they cost. And so I would consider myself a proponent of homeschooling. I think the federal government's going to come after them. I think the federal government's going to shut this down unless they comply with federal law and No Child Left Behind and those types of things. I think that, and the private schools. In fact, I think the private schools are going to write right away that unless they comply with Common Core standards, they're going to lose all kinds of funding or any involvement with the federal government. But the homeschoolers are in big trouble, because I don't think the feds are going to allow people to teach kids the way they want. They want the group think. They want everybody to do the same. They want them to understand drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And so this mass exodus is also a problem. And I think that'll continue to increase until they crack down on it. I think you'll see more exodus to private school and to homeschooling, just because of Common Core standards and the involvement of the federal government. And why I'm poo-pooing federal government involvement is now it's 10,000 miles up in the air away from us. If you've got a grievance or disagree, if you want to participate in your school, control of it is now in Washington, D.C., where it used to be in the state capitol building. Prior to that, it was in your local districts. You knew the people running the schools. You knew the board people. You could get to the people in your state, but you can't get to anybody in the federal government to impact it. And that's what they like about it. They can make laws, come up with stuff, and regulate your life, and never see you, never know you, and then exempt themselves from any involvement with their regulations. So I say, make sure you know unschooling. There's a question on the test about unschooling. And we're going to continuing adult education. And it has a number of things here. Existed centuries. First of all, the immigrants provided stuff for the new immigrants to this country to learn English. Was the first form of it, and of course it was done by schools and churches. Factories decided they had to do some safety training. That was adult ed. Churches taught a religious instruction. You can put any of this you want in the notes and so forth. Public schools develop extensive English language programs. Here it says Gary, Indiana designed adult vocational and technical training programs, developed rural agricultural education, if maybe some of you are involved with that. Vocational agriculture, or FFA, that was an outgrowth of that. Here's another federal piece of legislation. Funding to help adults learn to read and write. just a number of adult things here. And then educational testing. Educators have undoubtedly attempted to measure the and assess student learning from the very beginning of formal education. Only the last 60 years have educational assessments taken on vast importance. May feel the assessment a proverbial tail that wags the dog. Educational, especially the recent things for assessments. Increased attention given to testing in the past. This Conant was the guy involved with the SAT. He was real big on standardized testing to compare intelligence levels, and he felt it was a way to assess a student's ability, student's potential to be successful at. Where did he care about? Harvard. He was the president of Harvard. So he wanted these tests given so he could pick out the best ones to come to Harvard, because he thought he could determine chance of succeeding by that. The ETS now is its national service, major power of the education testing movement. By 60, more than 1 million students were taking the SAT. Developed for the past 60 years, faced increasing pressure in recent years to develop improved ways to assess learning. Okay. So you make a comment here. I did here's 13. Here's number 14. Okay. And changing aims of education. The aims of education in the United States have reflected changing perspectives on education over the years. During colonial times, the overriding aim of education was to enable students to read and understand the Bible, to gain salvation, enter the gates of heaven, and spread the gospel. After the colonies won their independence from England, education objectives such as providing citizens with a common language, attempting to instill a sense of patriotism, developing national feelings of unity and common purpose, provide the technical and agricultural training became important tasks. And I would agree with that. It's interesting, we kind of gotten away from that. You think of that again. This said after that what they were common language, and why I'm finding fault with that, because we now do not emphasize common language. In fact, we're going to have Spanish-speaking schools, language, maintaining your home language, and then attempting to instill a sense of patriotism. And to the point now, it's unpatriotic to display the flag or be proud of the flag because, well, as the president said, it's too divisive to wear the flag. And developed a national feeling of unity and common purpose. And I've never seen our country at a time more divided than it is here in the last 5 years. And provide the technical and agricultural training development our nation needed. And of course, we've kind of abandoned that. So at first we had the Committee of 10 in 1892. And they the committee was established by the NEA, the teachers union, to study the function of the school. The committee, known as Committee of 10, made an effort to set down the purpose of the high school at that time and made the following recommendations. And these 4 things are what you're going to bring in here. And this will be number 14, or 15, number 15. And it was 4 things. And they are numbered here on page 60. And they are this. High school should consist of grades 7 to 12. Courses should be arranged sequentially. Students should be given a few electives in high school, and 1 unit called a Carnegie unit should be awarded for each separate course student takes each year, provided the course meets 4 or 5 times each week. The Committee of 10 also recommended trying to graduate high school students earlier, to permit them to attend college sooner. At that time, the recommendation implied that high schools had a college preparatory function. Okay, and they kind of just mentioned this, but this group, that was their thing, how to prepare them for college. Then the 7 cardinal principles, this was, remember this up here, was just in 92, just 8 years later, or, let's see what it was, 1918, I guess it was. Commission on Reorganization of this. So it was, it's interesting, 20 years later they're going to reorganize. We adopted the Committee of Ten's recommendations, and now we're 20 years later. We're going to come up with the 7 cardinal principles because we're going to we passed another piece of federal legislation, the Reorganization of Secondary Education Act. The cardinal principles of secondary refer to the 7. Okay, and so here are the 7 things here. And that will be your number 16. Those 7 things. Bring those 7 things in here. And here they are. Health, command of fundamental process, worthy home membership, vocation, civic education, worthy use of leisure, and ethical character. It's important that you have ethical character. And then shortly after, we had the 8-year study. Following goals of education and needs of youth were listed in a Progressive Education Association in 1938. So just 20 years later, we had to reorganize it again. It grew out of the 8-year study of schools conducted by this. And they came up with 11 things between 32 and 40. And you get to bring those in here so you have them all. 11 things. Do that. So in 1938, the Education Policies Commission of the National Education Association set forth purpose of education in American democracy. These objectives stated that students should receive an education in 4 broad areas. And you've got them. There they are. Self-realization, human relations, economic efficiency, and civic responsibility. You don't need to tell them what those are. They're just a mouthful, but it was just interesting. Here we are. This was here, and right away, now we have another statement saying this is the objectives the students should have. Then Education for All American Youth, 44, this same commission of the NEA published another statement of educational objective entitled Education for All American Youth. And they had these 5. Equipped to enter an occupation suited to his abilities and offering reasonable opportunities for personal growth. Number 2, prepare him to assume full responsibility of American citizenship. 3, give him a fair chance to exercise his right to the purpose of happiness through the attainment of mental and physical health. Stimulate intellectual curiosity and inner satisfaction. And 5, help develop appreciation of ethical values. And, of course, I'm going to let you bring all of those in right here. And this was number 18, right? Yes. And this one is number 19. The imperative needs of youth. In 1952, we have another statement. And I know I'm kind of poo-pooing this, but we still do this today, and we still have groups together today and come out with these grandiose statements. But here's theirs. They have a bunch of them. And you don't have to do anything with them. Don't have to do that one. Just to be familiar with it. Let's move on to preparation of the teachers, because most present-day teachers have excellent preparation, including at least 4 and often 5 or 8 years of college education. It's difficult to believe that teachers have historically had little or no training. Well, it started in the European beginnings. The first formal teacher training was in Western world, which we have any record of, was by the King of England. And he wanted this. And then Bingham was granted the request to establish this House College with a teacher institution in 1439. And this is on the test. Know what that is, because that's on the test, that college, what we're known for. And then we come down here. Teachers in the various kinds of colonial elementary schools typically had only an elementary education themselves. Okay? So early on. But a few had a Latin grammar school or private academy or some more, and because many colonial schools were conducted in connection with the church, the teacher often considered an assistant to the minister. because they were religious-based schools and had all these other responsibilities and obligations. And so we're coming to this. Here is teaching manners a good use of classroom time? And again, I'm going to ask you not to comment until you've read both sides, the yes and the no. And I'm going to take you to this and put this up and make a new post for you to comment on. Sorry. Is teaching manners a good use of classroom time? And again, I'm going to put this up. Looks like this now. So you've got 3 of them there. And I'm going to make that number 20. And again, mark it in your notes. Discussion is number 20. Okay. We're talking about the European beginnings. And now we'll say that the colonial teachers in colonial America were very poorly prepared. In fact, more often than not, they received no special training. Single qualification most teach themselves that they had been students. On the other hand, most colonial college teachers provided tutors, Latin or academy teachers that received some kind of college. Okay, so that's what you say here. We're very poorly prepared, little or no training, often just elementary. Teacher indentured servants, and again, one of the first forms of teacher training in the medieval guide system was a young man who wished to enter a certain field of work served lengthy periods of apprenticeship with a master in the field. Some men became teachers by serving as apprentice to master teachers for as long as 7 years, but sometimes kind of used white indentured servants. Okay, and that's I would think offensive, because normally you don't think of that, but yes, many people who came to the United States bought passage by agreeing to work for some years. And again, that sounds horrible, but they were escaping an oppressive government. And that's why they were so anxious to get here, and that's still why people are anxious to get here. And what's so interesting is they went down that trail, the other countries, and there's never been a time in history where you see people oppress people. Oppression and trauma in countries comes from government. That's what's so interesting to me, that we give so much control to the federal government, is because history tells us that's who oppresses people. But people were so oppressed, they were willing to come here as indentured servants in order to escape where they were and get to this country for the opportunity for freedom of religion, freedom of economics. The ship's captain would then sell the indentured servant services more often than not by placing an ad in the newspaper, similar to what's up here. That's what that is. Records reveal that among early immigrants to this who were advertised and sold as teachers, there were many indentured servants and, get this, convicted felons. And that's another reason they often would leave their country, is to escape their past. In fact, it has been estimated that at least 1/2 of all teachers in colonial America may have come from these sources, meaning indentured or convicted felons. This is not necessarily a derogatory description of these early teachers when we consider that many poor people bought their passage to the colonies by agreeing to serve as indentured servants for a period of years. And that in England at that time, hungry and desperate people could be convicted as felons and deported for simply stealing a loaf of bread. And again, I say to you, who was oppressing these people that they were poor and hungry? The government! Well, that's what's so interesting, that we would turn so much power over to the government when that's the only one in the history that's oppressed people. So you have this, teachers as indentured servants. Can you put a line here and some information about why they were indentured servants from that reading there on page 64. Teaching apprenticeships. Some colonial teachers learned their trade by serving as an apprentice to schoolmasters. Court records reveal that numerous such indentures of apprenticeships were this, and here's a little quip about this. You don't have to do that one. And then we started teacher training. One Benjamin Franklin's justification for proposing an academy in Philadelphia was some of the graduates would make good teachers. And of course, he picked the brightest one. Speculating on the need for such graduates, Franklin wrote this about it. The fact that Franklin had said some of the poorer graduates would make suitable teachers reflects on how low regard for teachers typical at that time. The academy that Franklin proposed was established in 1951 to become teachers. Then normal schools. Many early educators recognized this country's need for a better qualified teachers. However, it wasn't until 1823 that the first teacher training institutions was established. This private school was called a normal school. And again, that's on the test, so you need to know what normal school means after an European prototype which had existed since the 17th century. This was Hall. It did not produce many teachers. It did signal the beginning of formal teacher training. The early normal school program usually consisted of a 2-year course, 2-year program, and you were a teacher. Students typically entered the normal school right after finishing elementary school. Most normal schools did not require high school graduation for the council until 1900. So prior to that, you didn't have to complete high school. You'd finish elementary school and go on to college and study teaching at the normal school. 19th century curriculum was much like the curriculum of high schools at that time. Student viewed subjects in this. And down here I've blocked the subjects offered at normal schools were this: English grammar, English comp, history, geography. I'm not going to read all those, but that's what you're going to put in here, is what they studied. This is number 22. What did they study? And it comes right here off of page 65. This. Even practice teaching. And then here's our friend from last chapter, Horace Mann. He was instrumental in establishing the first state-supported normal school, which opened in 1839 in Lexington, Massachusetts. Other public normal schools established shortly afterwards typically offered a 2-year teacher training program. Some of the students came directly from elementary, others had completed secondary. Some states did not establish state-supported normal schools until the early 1900s. Okay, so here is number 23. I'm going to put it down here, number 23. We have one. There was a state established. They're not called normal schools anymore, but one of the colleges in South Dakota was designated the state normal school. You do a little research and find out which present-day college in the state of South Dakota was the normal school. And it could include private schools. I'll give you a hint. It's not one of the private schools, one of the public schools, but one of the 6 remaining public schools was the normal school. For number 23, you research and find out which one it was and mark it clearly. All right. The state teacher college, in the earlier part of the 20th century, several factors caused significant change in normal schools. For one thing, as the population in the United States increased, so did the enrollment in elementary schools, thereby creating an ever-increasing demand of elementary school teachers. And what happened? Then there was more people in high school. When the high schools got popular, and to meet that demand, the normal schools eventually expanded their curriculum to include secondary programs. And the growth of high schools all created a need for teachers who were highly specialized in their subjects. And that's the difference. Our elementary teachers are supposed to be, their specialty is teaching methods and teaching, and high schools, you're an expert in your subject. And the length of the teacher program expanded from 2, then 3, then finally 4 years. This longer duration fostered development of diversification. The demand for teachers increased from about 20,000 in 1900 to 200,000 in 1930. So think of that growth in just 30 years, from 20,000 to 200,000. And let me tell you a quick story. My wife's mom, my mother-in-law, who I met, but she died before I married my wife, she was a 2-year teacher. and she taught kindergarten, and she lived through a time when the requirements in South Dakota changed from 2 years to 4 years. So she spent many a summer getting her 4-year degree after teaching a number of years. She was a kindergarten teacher a number of years, and in that time she got sick. And my wife believes somewhat that she was so driven, she so was afraid to lose her job teaching kindergarten that she ignored some symptoms she had. She eventually died of breast cancer, but she got her 4-year degree and walked across the stage midlife and got to continue teaching kindergarten students. And so that was a great thing. And she was one that was in this time. The United States gradually advanced technology to the point where college-educated citizens were needed. Normal school responsibilities for that. As normal schools extended their programs of 4 years, began granting baccalaureate degrees. They also began to call themselves state teacher colleges for most institutions, and that took place in the 30s. Where are we at? And normal schools evolved into state teacher colleges because they added so much high school stuff. So put that here for number 24. That was really how they came to be, was to have more advanced specific subject training. And changes in the mid-20th century. Universities entered the teacher prep business at a large scale in 1900. Before then, some graduates, but not until 1900 did the university begin to establish departments of education. Full range of programs. Back that up a little bit. This is the evolution of teacher prep institutions. And you kind of see how it goes. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to clip that for you, if you'll give me a second. And I'm going to import that. Okay. And I'm going to come over here and put this in your page. I'm going to go like this. And now I will put it in here, I'll bring it in the file. And now you'll download this and upload it in yours. Remember how we did that? Save as, save the image as, and then you insert it into your notes. Let me get rid of this. And this will be number 25, and that is importing this in here. Import image. Okay. This is all about state colleges here. And recent trends. Education experienced a major change in a wide variety of perspectives following World War II. As John Dewey, George Counts, Will Bagley, Terman, Charters, Terman, other intellectuals, look at that word, That's how they separate them into intellectuals. I find that word offensive too, to describe some as intellectuals, that they had a different perspective, who had held sway during the first half of the 20th century, yielded to a somewhat less philosophically oriented breed of researchers presented by Maslow, Hevinghurst, Bloom, Gulliford, Konebar, Brunner, these folks, Chomsky, Piaget. The Progressive Educational Association closed its doors, and a series of White House conferences on youth education inaugurated the attempt to improve education. And really, they didn't close their doors. They rebranded itself. Progressive Education rebranded itself to other things because the word progressive was so offensive to people that they rebranded themselves. And then the White House took it over, or the progressives. No school system on earth has been scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected as profoundly and mercilessly as that in the United States. And let me put that in there. And I want you to put this in your notes. No school system on earth has been scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected as profoundly and as mercilessly as that of the United States. And that's right here. And this is number 26. And just take this right from page 66. Bring that in. 40s, the 50s, educational institutions at all levels not only flooded with unprecedented numbers of students, but also censored and flailed mercilessly of self-orientated critics. These frantic rush of stimulus. Public schools were characterized as godless, soft, undisciplined, uncultured, wasteful, disorganized. Critics who remember the high failure rates of the tests given in World II draftees were determined to raise public levels. So it highly criticized, and this, and so then the new emphasis. And again, you don't. This was the new emphasis here of this. Fortunately, although some people were highly critical of the schools, not everybody panicked. There were physical fitness programs, character education projects, general tightening of educational standards, and much more. Gulliford, Torrance, and Gazelle, and others explored the boundaries of creativity. Barr and Ryans carried on enthusiastic studies. There were primarily block programs, integrated groupings, plans devised by and named this. So this. So first was the analysis of teaching. Research had been attempted to identify characteristics of teaching styles closely associated with effective instruction. Hundreds of studies that were done. 50s, the focus began what ought to occur in teaching. Ned Flanders, it sounds like a made-up name. Ned Flanders and other researchers developed observational scales for assessing verbal communications between teachers and students. Scale observes categories, summarize actions between the teachers. Time and motion studies. So now, first we studied about how they talked. We talked to them, and then we had time and motion studies. Analyze teacher behaviors. Components of effective teaching. Introduce teacher candidates to the elements judged most important to be good teaching. So we looked at teacher characteristics. It is now possible to assess, this is interesting, it's now possible to assess the logical, verbal, and nonverbal and effective and attitudinal dimensions of instruction through research, as well as intricate aspects of cognitive development. In teacher effectiveness, the past 50 years, research has focused more closely on the instructional patterns. The effective teaching movement is based on the research that offers today's teachers important skills. So that's the biggest thing. We don't put that in words enough for you as pre-service teachers, but teaching methods today should all be based on research-based abilities, or research-based methods. Yes, meaning that somebody studied it and found that it'd be an effective model. And we're going to drive you a little crazy with that in the years to come. I think eventually it'll relax. It's one thing about education and teaching. If you can't see that from this chapter, let me tell it to you straight out. Education is very cyclical, in and out. Things are in, then out, then in, then out, then in, then out. And I guarantee that's what this will be. It's a really boom right now. That are what you're doing, is it research based? Is it research approved? And there has a lot of validity to that. But we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're really hamstringing some effective teachers to do things that they know to work because it's not research based. All right. It talks about what effective teaching is here. The recent emphasis on, I'm down here now, recent emphasis on demonstration, prompting, and practice is far cry from relatively unstructured classrooms of the past. So analysis, teacher effectiveness, and each of these, I'm going to say this is number 27. Just one line, bring one line in for each of those. All right. Then there was studying the learning process that talks about you must master certain parts of it. They use teachable moments, this cognitive development of Piaget. And so that's number 28 here, Piaget. And he has these cognitive development stages here. So you would go stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. Stage 1, semi-motor, preoccupational. And I would make enough notes so you know what this is because it's on the test. 1 to 4. And Bloom here, what was Bloom's things? You've heard of Bloom's taxonomy. Here's Benjamin Bloom, what his thing was, educational objectives. He has 3 things here. And so you bring Bloom in here, number 29. 1 to 3 things in here, so you have it. And Skinner, you know Skinner, his thing was behavioral theory. And so you talk about Skinner here. All right. Then we come back and say, what are the critics saying? Very interesting here. They acknowledge this. Another challenge in education was pointed out to the phalanx of critics, all holding differing perspectives. And it lists those here and what their publication was. Coming of Age in America, Crisis in the Classroom, Death of an Early Age, Deschooling Society, How Earth Fail, A Nation at Risk. All these critics of the educational movements, and there's been tons of them. These critics have not gone unnoticed. Friedenberg's call for alternatives to traditional education, so there's endorsement of open education, Kozel's plea of agreement. And again, I wish we could do a whole chapter on what those pendulum swings were that they're talking about. You and all educators need to learn about the multicultural programming, because all another mind us with a good understanding of educational history can help you do that, of multicultural programming. And I'm going to say to you, I have no idea why that's related. Okay. Then major educational events of the past. Okay, keep doing that to make sure it's working. Move to the 21st century, many people reflect on educational accomplishments in the United States in the past 100 years. As would be expected, perspectives differ. Remember, that was these authors acknowledged at the beginning of the last chapter that perspectives differ on this subject. This Brodinsky, an educational journalist, has suggested that the GI Bill of Rights should perhaps be considered the single most important education event of the century. And I don't know how you pick the GI Bill. He lists desegregation of schools as second most, and 94-142, Education and Handicapped Act, as the third most important. Interesting. And there's others. Completion the trace list would go on. One example of significant progress made by the educational system in the past 75 years is reflecting the increased percentage of students completing high school from 50% in the 40 to 70% in 90. And so you put that here, what happened to the graduation rate. And this would be number 31. That is one accomplishment we have right here on page 70. Then Figure 3.3 shows a timeline of yet another efforts that have influenced education over the past half century. It is difficult to draw meaningful inference from recent events that have not yet stood the test of time. And I'm glad they acknowledge that. Meaning, I'll read that to you again, and it's difficult to draw meaningful inference from recent events that have not yet stood the test of time. One of which I'm saying to you is the infusion of technology. I assure you we will come to a point in the future where we say we've went way overboard with the technology. Bring back the chalk and the boards. Bring back the paper and pencils. It's a ways out there, but I'm telling you, as we study the history of education, it's coming. What should be the role of the federal government in education? That's a big one, and you've heard me rant about that. And I think we will see that the feds take more control before less. How can equal education opportunity be achieved in the United States? How professionalized should teachers in the school system be? And I talk about how professionalized is, should teachers be required to be get a master's degree? In the state of New York, you're not a fully certified teacher until you have a master's degree. Did you know that? Here's another one. To what degree should educational policy and practice be influenced by litigation, meaning the courts, the unelected body that get to make rules? How will school reform movements change the practice in education? What will be the expanding and evolving role of technology in our schools? And the answer to these questions, the answers you may have in mind, will be colored the perspective of which people view the world, children, and schools. We believe that viewing all educational questions through well-informed historical perspectives yields more valid effort. So they're saying, these authors saying, study history to come up with these answers. Looking back to look ahead, perspectives on education have changed throughout history. This makes predicting the future of education very difficult. Perhaps even impossible. Somewhat foolhardy rather than attempting to do the best advice. And again, they emphasize knowing and understanding educational history will help us do this better, predict the future. All right. And this, I have clipped this, and I am going to give you this also to download, and this will be your last thing. Put this in your notes. Both of these, put these in your notes. Number 32 image for your study, and I'll quickly bring that in for you so that you can see it. I'm going to go back here under clips, and I'm going to come down below here and put it down here for you. There. You download this and upload it in your notes, just as you did this one. There you have it. Perspectives of History, Chapter 3.